Do you remember the time when Japanese role-playing games ruled the world and Squaresoft was the unrivaled master of creating some of the best JRPGs around? When Final Fantasy stood for quality you could trust in? Do you feel any kind of nostalgia for those days? Then boy do I have the game for you.
Bravely Default, a game by Square Enix for the Nintendo 3DS, is a classic Final Fantasy game in all but name. With a story and characters reminiscent of 8-bit Final Fantasy games, gameplay influenced by 16-bit Final Fantasy games, and presentation straight out of a PlayStation-era Final Fantasy game, Bravely Default is a grenade of nostalgia. It tells the story of 4 warriors who have to band together to rid the world of an evil force by awakening 4 elemental crystals and fighting a tyrannical empire. On their way, they will fight many foes in a classic turn-based battle system. The hook here is the titular Bravely Default system, and it lets you take multiple actions in a row. This is called Brave. Or not take any actions at all and just guard. This is called Default. If you take multiple actions in one turn, your character won't be able to move for some turns. And if you default, you can bank actions to take multiple ones in the next turn without penalty. This adds a great deal of strategy through a risk-reward system that incentivizes you to make smart choices about when to brave and when to default. The game also utilizes a job system reminiscent of Final Fantasy V. Your characters have both character and job levels that you level up independently. By leveling a job, you will unlock job abilities that you can equip even if you change the job. This way you can create some really deadly job combinations. Let's say you unlock the White Mage's healing abilities. You could equip those, switch to the Monk job, and have a damage dealer with healing spells. There are 24 different jobs in total you can unlock throughout the game, and the combinations are countless. If you're anything like me and grew up with classic Final Fantasy games, Bravely Default will instantly endear itself to you. With its charming characters and the presentation of older Final Fantasy games, you will breeze through big chunks of the game. Due in no small part to the fact that the game designers went above and beyond in smoothing out a lot of stale JRPG conventions. Even though the pace of battle is pretty quick, you can fast forward through the battles if it's not quick enough for you. Sick of the random encounters? You can adjust their frequency and even turn them off completely. Or you increase their frequency if you just want to grind some. You can also adjust the game's difficulty on the fly, so even people who never touched a JRPG in their lives should be able to get through the game. The game features an overworld that looks like a PS1 era Final Fantasy map, but has the size and scope of an NES Final Fantasy. The same goes for the dungeons. They are all rather small and straightforward, and you are never required to solve puzzles more complex than pulling levers to open doors. Outside of the main quest, you can find a number of side quests, which usually unlock new jobs for you to use. The game's graphics and sound do a great job of conveying a classic Final Fantasy feel. The characters are all very well designed, if a little low on animations. The music is beautiful and a definite highlight. English localization is very well done with voice actors that fit the characters, but purists can't turn on the Japanese voice work. While the story is very simple and its spots predictable, it does a well enough job of pulling you along. The highlight of the game is definitely the battle system and the way you can play around with all the mechanics of the fights and the job system.
So with all that, the game sounds like a return to Square's greatness we've all been waiting for. And it would have been if it wasn't for one big flaw of the game. In the last stretch of the game, let's say like the last quarter, maybe a bit less, the game gets very repetitive, both in a narrative as well as in a gameplay sense. Due to a narrative reason I don't really want to get into for spoiler reasons, you're required to replay old dungeons and refight old bosses. Now, this wouldn't be too much of a problem if the game didn't then ask you to do it again. And then again. You have to do this like 4 times before the game finally lets you fight the last bosses. It's just lazy. But there's hope. Here's a little PSA for you. There is a way to skip all that. So once the game tells you to basically replay stuff you did already, just look up how to skip it. Because the game never tells you how to do it, and it doesn't really make much sense. You basically have to do the opposite of what the game tells you. So, once the game tells you to refight old bosses and stuff, just look up how to skip it. Trust me on that one. I wish someone told me, because that way you can just skip the worst part of the game. Or basically the only bad part of the game. So just do that. Trust me.
So while the problems at the end detract from the game, it wasn't enough to make me forget the joy I experienced in playing up to that point. So in conclusion, while it's not quite the second coming of classic JRPGs, Bravely Default still manages to encapsulate a lot of the elements that made us fall in love with Final Fantasy games in the first place, and is therefore recommended to all fans of JRPGs and people who want to get into them. And it is especially recommended if you are frustrated with modern Final Fantasy games and want something lighthearted and nostalgic.